Okay, welcome. Great to see all your faces as always. I missed some of you guys for, I think, at least a week, 2 weeks. I haven't seen some of you. We are making our way through chapter 2. It is an eternal science. So even if we just do one verse, we can do one verse every class. And if I'm deep enough, I can get meaning from that one verse over and over again. I don't think I'm that deep. So we need some variety, and we'll move our way through the next section, where I believe we're leaving off, let's see, chapter 2, verses 47 on. That is where we left off. So just very brief last class. I don't want to keep giving the same synopsis over from the beginning, but at least last class, we began to really go deep at the concept of karma yoga. And it's contrasted with karma kanda, which karma kanda is, again, just kind of materialistic activities to get pleasure and to avoid pain. Okay, and the Vedas are full of these kind of like quote unquote like life hacks. Like, this is how you get as much pleasure from life as possible, and this is how you avoid as much pain as possible. And there's complete sections of the Vedas just dedicated to this kind of advanced materialism. And then Krishna kind of gives that as a lure, like, hey, don't you want to fight because of all the cool materialistic things you could get? And then he sees like that doesn't really work either. So then he uses that as a segue to what he really wants to speak about, which is the glories of karma yoga, which is really the art of being in the world and being a human while also recognizing transcendence and recognizing divinity in every step of the way. Okay, having God consciousness walking through the world. And so we said that really the one who's just focused on enjoyment and the one who's performing karma yoga may look like they're doing the same activities. So one may be going to work, one may be going to the bathroom, one may be gardening, one may be doing all these different sorts of activities. But what is different is the consciousness in which those activities are done. That's what differentiates the materialist from the spiritualist, not necessarily the activities, although there are prohibitions and recommendations for spiritual practice, which we haven't really gotten into yet. But it can look very similar. And so one cannot judge by face value. And many stories in the Vedas of this, of people judging the the external activities of great sages and great yogis, only to be proven wrong about them in really embarrassing ways, like people criticizing Lord Shiva. Who is Lord Shiva? You know, he's such a lusty fellow. He has his wife sitting on his lap and he's in front of all these sages. You know, how disrespectful. And look at him, he's covered in ashes and he hangs out in crematoriums and with all these kind of unscrupulous people, these unsavory personalities. Look at him, you know, sometimes he's smoking the ganja, and all these different criticisms they can think about these great elevated personalities. Now, of course, when someone's on a very high level, we can't just mimic them and say, oh, you know, I'm doing it in divine consciousness. Do all sorts of nonsense and say, oh, I'm doing it because I'm so spiritual. You know, we're not that advanced, actually, to be able to justify things that are outside of the scope of Dharma. And we'll see here that Krishna is going to hint at this and really unpack this for us. But ultimately, there's a lot of rules in the Vedas, and even within karma yoga, there's many rules, and those are meant to help us establish a particular etiquette, what's called sadachar, like the proper behavior of a saintly person, of a person who's trying to graduate in their spiritual practices. But ultimately, in the final result, one graduates from all these rules and can pay no regard to these rules in one sense, because their very essence becomes love, and everything that they do is powered by love. And so the rules are no longer, which doesn't mean, you know, they can just go around doing horrible things, but that when one becomes completely pure, there is no possibility of impurity. And sometimes from a material standpoint or a material moral standpoint, a saint be seen to do something that appears immoral, that is actually in alignment with Dharma, but may not be in alignment with the woke laws of material society, of what is good and bad. Okay. Anyways, this is not the most powerful presentation of this point. It requires some unpacking. So we'll get in. So we can take a deep breath and exhale. And we'll begin from verses 247. And really, verses 47 to 53 are describing karma practice. Okay, so we're going to zoom in on this little section, 6-7 verses for a moment, 47 to 53. I'll be back to the regular view. Okay. So 47, you have a right to perform your prescribed duty, but you are not entitled to the fruit of action. Never consider yourself the cause of the results of your activities. Never be attached to not doing your duty. Perform your duty equipoised or not abandoning all attachment to success or failure. Such equanimity is called yoga. O Dhananjaya, keep all abominable activities far distant by devotional service. And in that consciousness, surrender on the Lord. Those who want to enjoy the fruits of their work are misers. Okay, we'll read one more. A man engaged in devotional service rids himself of both good and bad reactions, even in this life. Therefore, strive for yoga, which is the art of all work. Okay, so we touched on this last class, but this karma yoga is really the performance of what's called prescribed action, right? Like the social obligations that we mentioned in the last class. So according to birth and one's nature, we have a particular social obligation, right? Well, you can be a laborer, you can be an intellectual, you can be a kind of martial or authoritative type person, you can be an entrepreneurial type person. And so it's the synthesis of that Varna Dharma, right? We spoke about the caste system a little bit and how it's a perverted, distorted reflection of this Varna Dharma, of understanding one's own nature and acting according to it. So it's the combination of this social obligation or Varna Dharma in the mood of complete detachment from the fruits of action. Okay, so you'll see these words thrown around many times throughout the Gita: be detached from the fruits of your labor, right? And this, like the karma phala, like the fruits, the phala of your karma. And the sense, really what it is detached from the sense of being the agent of action, the doer, the controller, the enjoyer, which rightly only Krishna can take that position in fullness. We're all like tiny little Krishnas, but if we think that we're the big cause and we're the big Krishna, it's going to cause pretty much all the distress that we're experiencing right now, which is called ignorance. So yes, another quality of this is displayed in verse 47. So don't be attached to not doing your duty, okay? So don't avoid your duty because of fear of becoming attached to the fruits, right? But also do your duty without becoming attached to your fruits. So it's kind of hard, right? It's like, okay, well, and I think a lot of people do this too. They avoid what their calling is because of what it may mean for them, what it may bring to them, what it may develop in one's consciousness. So we settle for doing someone else's duty. And it also causes a type of disease, according to Ayurveda, that disharmonious union of our psychophysiological nature and the work that we do. And we see most people are like this. They do something that actually isn't appropriate for their nature, and it causes disease. Because so they're attached to fruits, like money. Okay. So the attachment to the fruit overrides the attachment to their dharma and is right for them. But also some people are detached from doing their duty. That can take many forms too, just laziness, lethargy, you know, and many other forms. Okay, let's see what else we have here. Okay, so without the desire for personal gain and emotionally detached by the success or failure of the action undertaken. So that's verse 48, right? Abandoning all attachment to success or failure. In such equanimity is called yoga. Yeah, pretty hard. Without attachment to success or failure. Okay, that's a good one. That's a good idea, right? But how do we do that? That's really hard. I once heard, and I really like the concept, and I've fleshed it out a little bit in my mind, but that yoga is that space between stimulus and response. That sattva is that space between stimulus and response. So one who is in tamas, one who is very covered by ignorance, there is no separation between the stimulus and the response to that stimulus. They are just immediately dragged by the mind. There's no difference. Just like when you watch television sometimes, or you get really absorbed in something, you actually forget yourself. You forget yourself and you forget your own story and you forget your own life, and you're just completely absorbed in the story of another, right? That's like what makes a good show or a good drama, is you forget yourself and you become absorbed. And so one who is deeply in ignorance also forgets oneself and is just dragged by whatever immediate thing comes up. There's no separation from action and being impelled by the action, by the sense object or the objects outside of them and responding. There's no difference. They're one and the same. They're completely controlled by nature. One who's a rajas, there may be a little deliberation, but one will probably still choose what is unfavorable, even though they have some awareness that it's not the best decision. But because of the pleasure principle, they will still pursue what is pleasurable, even if they know it will cause pain, which, as we know, that rajas is that attachment to pleasure is innately connected to the receiving of displeasure in one-to-one ratio. So then sattva, if we think of sattva is that kind of equanimity. I don't know what the word is, how to use it for present tense, but how to be equal, how to be situated in oneself. That is really what true sattva means. And transcendence is this next level of being even above the material mode of sattva. And it's called Shuddha Sattva. It means absolute goodness. Shuddha means pure. Sattva, goodness, purest goodness. Above material goodness and being like a righteous, balanced person, there is transcendence. And that is kind of what that is exactly what this is speaking about, is that level of equanimity is called yoga. Because one is no longer at all controlled by objects. Right? Objects or their emotional reality in relation to objects. Their emotional reality is actually, let me turn this off. Sorry about that. Their emotional reality is not at all dictated by the world around them. Their emotional reality is distinctly situated within themselves and within the joy of the self, which is very nice, right? The closest that most people get to that is really deep tamas, which is sleep, which is where the vicissitudes or the fluctuations of the mind really, it only really happens in deep sleep, because even in dreams, the mind is still whiling out and doing its thing. But in deep sleep, one finally forgets existence and can in one sense, experience non-existence, which is why many people like sleep so much, because it is in one sense a kind of distorted reflection of being situated in pure consciousness, but it is like the dark side of that. It is just pure sleep, lack of awareness, non-existence, right? Is this making sense so far? I'm pulling a lot of concepts together. Okay, so I really like that. Like we can see how woke we truly are by the separation of strong stimulus from our emotional response, which doesn't mean we become dull-hearted, people, but it means that we become balanced people who are not just immediately swayed by pleasure and pain that we perceive in the world around us. Okay, that's really the concept here. All right. So let's see. Yeah, so basically the kind of idea here is that we generally place our emotional response to success and failure over duty and transformation. We prioritize our emotional responses over duty and over transformation. It's really like I was just speaking to a men's group that I was a part of a few weekends ago about this. Like they asked me to speak about the hero's journey. And I think many people avoid the hero's journey. Has anyone heard of the hero's journey, like Joseph Campbell? Okay, it's really good. So it's the major premise behind any movie and any good story is there's a problem and there's a call to action and you have to face your demons, whether outside of you or inside of you. And that requires discomfort and it requires some outside help and it requires a call to adventure. And most of us don't really like that. So we avoid the call to adventure and we stay safe and we stay small. We stay basically bound by our own mechanisms of imprisonment because we're happy about it. We're like, okay, and then we kind of like try to trade up in this world. We're like, oh, you only have brass shackles? I have golden shackles. Look at me. And that's so enviable. And we're like, oh, yes, very nice gold shackles. So nice. I wish I had that. I wish I had that too, right? And we're like so envious. Oh, this guy has the golden shackles with the diamonds and it's like Gucci style. But many of us don't think of another way to phrase it is one of the gurus, he says, most of us are thinking how to live the dream, but not many are thinking to wake up from the dream. Right. So I really appreciated that too. Okay, then verse 49, basically, again, Krishna is like contrasting karma yoga with karma kanda. Okay. So he's saying, that devotional service, which Prabhupada here is kind of equating with karma yoga because ultimately the perfection of all action is love. And so you'll see this in many parts of the Gita where Srila Prabhupada, he translates particular terms in relation to the ultimate conclusion of the Bhagavad Gita, which is devotional service or. So you'll see, even it says karma yoga, jnana yoga, and he'll translate it as bhakti. And because he's giving the central locus, he's giving the central axis by which the wheel of the Gita turns, and he's translating everything in relation to that central axis. So anyways, it says, keep all abominable activities, meaning all good and bad karmas, sent by devotional service. In that consciousness, surrender to the Lord. I feel like a Christian preacher right now. Surrender to the Lord. I could talk to 1,000 Christians right now. One of my mentors once said he's like a very excitable Brooklyn man, but also a transcendentalist and a disciple of Srila Prabhupada himself. And he was like all riled up and excited about something that I was telling him. And he was like, Yamuna, I feel like I could preach to 1,000 Christians right now. And I just always remembered that, but just as an image, as like an emotion, like a status on Facebook, feeling like I could preach to 1,000 Christians right now. And then he's contrast this karma yoga by saying those who want to enjoy the fruits of their works are misers, meaning they're cheap people. They're just saving their pennies for trinkets and the useless stuff. That's what miserly means, like cheap. You save up all your little pennies in your penny jar just to waste it on some cigarettes or something else abominable. Because he's going to contrast the pleasures of this world, no matter how great we see them as so minuscule, just a drop of water compared to the ocean of prema, the ocean of pure divine love that we can experience and that is available to us. So he's like, oh, just misers, you know. He just glorified karma just a few verses before, kind of entice Arjuna. And he saw that didn't work. So he says, what is this karma? What is this karma? This is cheap stuff. It is for misers. Try this karma yoga. It is much better. Okay. Let's see. Okay, so anyways, just to give you a little further view of this karma kanda and karma yoga and delineate it a bit more. Karma kanda is really this idea, and I'll put it in the chat too. Oops, here we go. Of bahushaka. Okay, it's kind of a funny word. It feels like an African tribal word or something that I could say, but bahushaka. Okay, really this means is one is faced externally. It means one is faced externally, and because one is faced externally, their buddhi, their intellect becomes many branched, or it becomes diffused into many channels of desires. I want this and I want that, and I can be this person, this person. What about, you know, and I face this all the time. I'm like, man, I have so many desires. I'm like, I want to become the best entrepreneur. I also want to like totally transcend this world. Also want to like pick up my music practice again. Maybe I'll learn Sanskrit. Maybe I'll learn Russian because my wife knows. Maybe I'll do, like there's just like so many desires, and I'm like, I'm very honest with myself, and I try to just pick one thing because I know I'm not such a hard soul to try to do more than one thing well, and I just try to pick one or two things max. But when we're faced so externally faced, then we become this bahusha, faced outward, and the buddhi becomes many branched. Okay, we become many branched. Anyways, even though this is like a little bit of an idealized situation, when I was living in the monastery, things are very simple. I just have my little piece of floor, that's my real estate, you know, and my yoga mat, and that's my spot. Don't touch my spot. I'm gonna sleep on my yoga mat. I have my little dresser, and it's just a tiny little thing, a few outfits. You know, people treat the ashram like a Salvation Army, and they just drop off their used stuff, and they, oh, so charitable, and we just pick through whatever is left, and you know, all these mismatched socks and you know things that don't fit and things with holes, and we wear it because you know we're trying to be holy, no pun intended. But that is life. It is just very simple. You do the same thing every day. That is spiritual life. One of the swamis that we know, he was, you know, how did you become so deep in your practice? And he said, boring life. He said, I do the same thing every single day. I do the same things at the same exact times for the past 50 years straight. I don't have the consciousness for that. My mind is so much more rajas and needs variety and, you know, all these things that cause me distress ultimately. But he said, boring life, which of course he's grave and he's a renunciate. So he's being a little dramatic because there's plenty of joy in spiritual life. But then I always thought about this, you know, when you're like a fired up young kind of monk in the ashram, you see these married people and you're like, ah, yes, look at this nonsense. So many desires, so much materialism. Wow. Look at this. They don't even read. Anyways, I wasn't this much of an extremist, but you know, some of those thoughts come, and there is some validity to it, because when you have no other obligation and you're just so focused and wake up the same time every day and your life is so focused and regimented, there's a big empowerment that comes with that. There's like, but then you realize as soon as you leave the ashram, most of that empowerment is borrowed from the environment and you feel helpless. You're like, no, all your power, like Harry Potter, like the Death Eaters, like it's like the environment begins to suck out your empowerment, and you realize how not spiritual you are after you leave the confines of the ashram and the empowerment of all those people around you. And then you see, yes, I see how these people, these married people are actually doing quite well for their situation. And then I have the direct experience of that, of course, getting married, and my wake up time gets way later and my go to bed time gets later and focus goes down, and material energy is very powerful and all this. But anyways, the idea is this many branched intelligence. And when I was a child, mother, she used to read this book to me. It was called If You Give a Mouse a Cookie. Anybody ever read it? Oh, that's so great. I always give this example and everyone's like, no, then I'm a little depressed because it's like one of those core memories. But anyways, the premise of the story is there's this mouse who's visiting, and the mouse is hungry and he smells the cookie baking. So the boy gives him a cookie. But then the story goes like, if you give a mouse a cookie, he's going to ask for a glass of milk, right? So then when you give him the milk, he's going to want a straw because he's a mouse. How can you drink from the glass like that? And then when he's finished, he's going to ask you for a napkin. And then when he wants to, then he'll want to look in the mirror to make sure he has no milk mustache, right? From drinking the milk. And when he looks in the mirror, he might notice that he needs a haircut because there's like a few stray hairs, right? So he was going to ask for a pair of scissors. And the book goes on and on and on like this. The whole book is like this. It's just the next desire and the next desire. And that is like us. And sometimes we can catch our mind going on these tangents. I just have this, and then I have this, and then this will happen, and then I'll need this. And it's never ending. It is like thinking that you will put out a fire by adding wood to it. You're like, oh yes, just let me get this one thing taken care of, and I'll put a little more wood in the fire, and then the fire will go out, and then I'll be more peaceful and shanti and, can meditate and all my things. And then you add your desire to that fire of desire, and the fire grows hungrier, right? And it grows hungrier and hungrier. So anyways, it talks about this Bahushaka, and then it says, because one can become bewildered by the flowery words of the Vedas. So really what it means, kind of all these words promising this material enjoyment, right? The glass of milk, the cookie, the pair of scissors, the mirror, that not all of that can lead us into the spiral of materialism mentioned there in the Vedas also. And because we are not really growing up in Vedic culture, we can't directly relate with that. But for us, it's like the celebrities and like the influencers and the Netflix shows and the Instagram and YouTube channels. And those are like gurus that are promising these flowery words and showing us what real enjoyment is like, right? You don't have this flavor of enjoyment yet. You should try. We're all jealous and then trying to aspire, trying to be influencers and all these things too. So that's really the allurement of part of this is all these promises, just like we are allured by these influencers and things like that. And really what this principle, the last principle here is called Veda Vata. This is mentioned either in the verse itself. I'll put it in the chat. You don't need to memorize it. But anyways, basically what this type of person is those who support material enjoyments by using scripture. Okay, so they make their arguments for enjoyment by rationalizing religious texts. They say, oh yes, one of the things which I'm not going to throw too much shade, but one of the things that bothers me fundamentally about some Judeo-Christian religions is the slaughtering of animals. And it doesn't really make sense. It doesn't really align with love and God and all that. But anyways, like the rationalization that I hear often from Christians whenever it's brought up, which I'm not so radical about bringing it up, but is that, oh yes, God gave dominion over earth and the animals and the plants, which basically means that for their mind, yes, you can use anything you want for your enjoyment. Yes, God gave us this earth for enjoyment, right? But really, it's like God wanted us to be shepherds, right? God wanted us to be stewards of ecology, stewards of other living entities. And that is what dominion means. Like you have the power And with that power comes responsibility. That is the dual-edged razor of power, is that with increased power and all these opulences, the increased necessity to employ the laws of Dharma and the laws of God, ultimately. So anyways, there's these whole group of people nowadays and for all of history that are considered these Vedavadarats, who use the Vedas to support all their materialistic desires. They say, oh yes, I picked this verse and I picked this verse, and look how we were giving a community group in our house. We've been doing it for months, but one of our saints has a very small philosophical point and a big treatise of philosophical points. Bhaktivinoda Thakur is his name. He said, without enough enjoyment, the body will die. And I say, yes, I'm following this very nicely. I'm making sure that I get enough enjoyment so that my body does not die. And I'm just following the words of the saints. So of course it's a joke, but we use like selected statements through the lens of our enjoyment, through the lens of our misconceptions. We rationalize not living up to truth through apparently spiritual concepts and ideals. And we all do it, okay? So it's kind of hinting at this here. Okay, whereas this karma yoga is referred to by Ek Kurunandana, means this resolute buddhi. This intellect is fixed. There's the story of Arjuna, anyways, I probably shouldn't go into too many stories because this is what happens. And then I literally cover 2 verses and then, this just keeps happening. Anyways, one should focus entirely on the goal, and this is called Ek Kurunandana, right? He's saying, Arjuna, have one-pointed intelligence, okay? So then we have this verse 50. A man engaged in devotional service or rids himself of both good and bad reactions even in this life. Therefore, strive for yoga, which is the art of all work. That's very nice. The art of all work is yoga. So he's basically saying that this karma yoga, even though it can look the same as karma externally, what it's really doing is reversing the effects of karma. It is destroying karmas, and it is not producing. It is making one free from vice and virtue, the effects of vice and virtue. When you act in yoga, you are freed from the effects of both vice and virtue. Okay, and then ultimately it gives one attainment of padam amayam, which means the place free from all blemish. Which is liberation, basically. So when one follows yoga, they're ultimately liberated. So anyways, this question can be given like the art of work. I really like meditating on that, right? Like, because all of us here are working in the world. And once my guru was asked by a student, when he lectures in India, I think there's like something about there's a particular type of challenge that Indian minds like to create in philosophical arguments. And I see it among Western minds. It's like a particular type of challenging and undercutting particular concepts that I see. And whenever I was traveling all over India, it would annoy me so much. They would try to bend particular things, say, oh, well, what about this one thing, aham brahmasmi, and I am God, and therefore I should enjoy like God. And all these like just arguments that don't make sense. But anyways, my guru giving some lecture to hundreds of IT students in Mumbai. And once, how is it you want us all to become these great spiritualists and yogis? Then who will build the bridges? Who will fix the houses? Who will, you want us all to be renunciates like you, Swamiji? Who will do these things? Who will cook the food? Who will grow the vegetables? Who will do the trading of goods? Who will, and he said, and what will happen if everyone becomes like you, an IT student? He says, who will grow the food? Who will grow the, so he just made the same argument to him. And he says that, giving this argument for that there's a societal body and that there are a need for all these different types of natures. And there's also a need for the renunciates of the world. And then he then went on to speak about this yoga as the art of work, because he says, if I become so spiritual, then I will achieve my material aspirations. And this is like a common argument or fear of people who are looking at the spiritual path. I don't want to become too spiritual, right? Spirituality is for when I become old, then I will become serious. I'll become the old man with the beard and say these wise euphemisms, hopefully develop an accent by then to become more compelling. And I will become spiritual like this. But for now, let me enjoy and let me do a little bit of Dharma, a little bit of virtue, a little bit of chanting, and that is enough. So this kind of question, will being spiritual detract from my career? And if we really think about it, for any work, there has to be an impetus for work. Is that right? Right? There has to be some impetus for work. The thoughts impel action, which means all action is derived from thought, from desire. And so when one works and has material aspirations, there's many material aspirations one can have and many that can impel one towards those things like money, position, fame, beauty, power, influence, etc. But what greater cause for action can there be than love? Right? So people will work so hard for money, so hard for power. And so he is saying really this karma yoga is the perfection of work, the art of work, because all work is then done for love. And love is the most powerful force and is the only force by which one can actually gain satisfaction and a return on their investment. So what greater cause is there than that? Right? Your boss says, oh, do this very hard thing and I'll give you some money. If you're hungry for money, you may say, okay, I'll do it. He says, do this thing that's double as hard and I'll give you the same amount of money. Oh, no, I'm okay. I'm okay, boss. Find someone else. Jim will do it. Whoever will do it. He's a money hungry guy. But that same person is your husband or your wife or your mother. You will do a very hard thing. And anyways, this is a little side note, but I think this is also a problem with manhood, that a man is willing to carry any heavy load, any heavy burden, as long as there is a cause like a family to carry it for. But now, anyways, we live in a society where now that is no longer cherished as an ideal, and where the man no longer is valued for the hard work and the providing and the sacrifice, even though like 93% of all death-inducing jobs are done by men, like oil rigging and deep sea fishing and trucking and construction and high-risk things. Men are much more willing to sacrifice their very life to provide, but then it's no longer valued. So then men become in the desperate state that they're in of no purpose and no love to work, carry that heavy load for, because men are evil and bad and all these things. Anyways, it's a more complex argument that I've spent hours speaking about elsewhere, but just to throw my little tea in there to a group of all men, whatever that's worth. Okay, so then this verses 52 and 53. We can take a deep breath and exhale. You guys good? Am I going too fast? Should I slow down a little? Okay, I get some blank stares, which tells me something. And then I get some, thumbs up, keep going. When intelligence has passed out of the dense forest of delusion, you shall become indifferent to all that has been heard and all that is to be heard. When your mind is no longer disturbed by the flowery language of the Vedas, and when it remains fixed in the trance of self-realization, then you will have attained the divine consciousness. So this is very nice. So Krishna basically promotes this attitude of almost like callous indifference to the lust-informed application of religion, the desire-informed application of religion. He did that in the previous verses. The Kamakanda route of just doing things materially. So he's putting that down. So anyways, again, that same point, when one embodies pure love, love is the force by which one acts, not rules. Okay. Let's see. Let's do a few more verses and then we'll end. So verse 54, Arjuna said, so this is a new section, okay? So now Arjuna has heard all about this karma yoga. Now he wants to know, like, give me an example of that. What does that look like? Because I'm very confused. Do I renounce or not renounce? You're telling me give up the fruits, or you're telling me act in this world. You're telling me act in this world, if I'm attached to fruits, is bad for me. So give me an example. What does this look like? Okay, so we get these next verses. Arjuna said, "Oh Krishna, what are the symptoms of one whose consciousness is thus merged in transcendence? How does he speak and what is his language? How does he sit and how does he walk?" Okay, so he asks for essential questions here. Let's see, what is this? Sorry. Verse 54 is like, what's the internal symptoms of the karma yogi? What does that person's consciousness look like? The karma yogi's consciousness look like? And then the next question that Arjuna asks, so there's 4 essential questions. One is like, what are the internal symptoms by which one can identify the karma yogi? Then the next one is, how does the karma yogi speak? How does the karma yogi sit? And how does the karma yogi walk? Okay, and all of these actually have a much deeper meaning than sit, speak, right? Like, does he speak fast or does he speak slow? Does he speak in an accent or does he speak, what kind of accent? It doesn't mean any of that. How does he sit? Does he sit in lotus pose? Does he sit in, it doesn't mean any of that. So there's some deeper meanings here. Okay, so basically he's asking, like, how do you know you're enlightened? How do you know you're enlightened? How do you know someone else is enlightened? And so Arjuna kind of gives this, or Krishna gives this answer. How do you know you're done eating? Anybody? How do you know you're done eating? You become full, right? You become full. No one can tell you are full. You know when you are full. You know when you are satisfied. You know when you have no more desire for food, right? Because you feel self-satisfied. You feel, I'm good. I no longer need more. And there shouldn't be any more. This is good. I'm satisfied. Okay. So this, in the same way, how do you know you're enlightened? Because you find pleasure in yourself. You're full in yourself. You're full of yourself. That's what I learned from Yoda today. He says the enlightened person is full of himself. It is true. In the deepest sense, the enlightened person is full of themselves, right? Because they're just rejoicing in their self. They're just situated in their own Atma, in their own soul. Okay, so this first question is given, and then Krishna answers this question. Krishna says, "O Partha, when a man gives up all varieties of desire for sense gratification, which arise from mental concoction, when his mind is purified, finds satisfaction in the self alone, then he is said to be in pure transcendental existence." Okay, so very beautiful. So we can read maybe, one who is not disturbed in mind, even amidst the threefold miseries, or elated with his happiness, and who is free from attachment, fear, and anger, is called a sage of steady mind. Yeah, this is like really the stuff that upset me when I first really met the bhakti yogis, the devotees, and I was kind of like doing a cross-examination with like my woke friends at the time. And I was like, man, these people is not free of attachment, fear, and anger. Like I was just kind of reading this stuff. And I was like, it's just the flip side. It is what they find righteous according to their attachment and aversion. Whereas who they're fighting is doing what they feel is righteous according to their attachment and aversion. Right? You can take any issue, which I'm not going to take any sides right now, but like abortion, right? There are the people who think, oh, the most woke thing is no abortion. No abortion. You should let the child live. And they're informed by their own attachment and aversion. And then the person says, no, you should allow the woman choice. You know, I'm pro-choice. And that's informed by their own. And each side is thinking themselves woker than the other. And it is the same cycle. It is the same thing from different sides of the coin. It is dual, it is duality, it is based within the three-mode nature. So anyways, that's a very charged example, but I was seeing it in all the social issues that my friends were fighting. And they're like just as hateful as the people on the other side. And they're like hating on them, and anyone who disagrees, they're like hitting, which of course is not a representation of all who are in that, certainly not. But this little sample size that I was observing was giving that vibe. And I was like, man, how does it get rid of this? Because it seems no matter what one's conceptions are, they are controlled by fear and anger and attachment and greed. No matter what side one takes in this world, they're controlled by these not so savory qualities. I mean, how do I give this? How do I become humble? And I just realized how disgusting consciousness was when I was like 17, 18. I was like, oh my God, like everything is about me. Like literally everything I do is just about me and is totally self-absorbed. Like even though I'm like a good person, like everything I do is just all about me. Is like complete narcissism, which is like, okay, you're like 7 years old. And, you know, like one of my teachers, he gives the example, he says, my daughter runs and, you know, she accidentally hits me on the head with her shoe or whatever. And I'm like, it really hurts. And then she cries because I'm hurt. And then I'm consoling her because she's crying about the fact that I got hurt. And it's like complete narcissism. You're comforting her because she hurt you. And it's just total absorption. Everything is about me. And that's normal for a child. That is considered healthy. Like everything about me is normal for a child. But one has to outgrow that. And I think many of us plateau, and our narcissism becomes couched in all these isms, feminism, nationalism, political ideals, all these things that become couched in a more complex intellectual fabric that we can then feel good about and rationalize, maintaining our narcissistic view, because so much validation is there. But see, the sage is kind of disgusted by these things. And not in like a judgment, just like even just seeing in himself these own qualities, which is really where our spirituality should take us, as a deep introspection. That we shouldn't use the principles of the Gita to judge another, but that we see, oh, this is me. I'm controlled by fear and anger and lust and greed. And look at my own heart. Ooh, it's not so cute, right? One of my friends also says you should curate your consciousness like you curate your Instagram page, right? You should curate your consciousness. Imagine if people put that much effort into curating their internal world as they do their Insta page. So anyways, let's just finish these verses. Let's see if I want to say anything more. I'll just go deeper into this one or two verses and we'll finish. So anyways, Krishna is saying when a person completely gives up all desires situated in the mind, he is known as Sthita Pragya. So this is used in, Sthita Pragya. Okay, Stita is like steady and pragya is like intelligence. Like one has a steady mind, steady intelligence. So he says, as desires belong to the mind, it is impossible that they can be given up. Right? If they belong to the Atma, it is possible. It is possible that they can be given up. Sorry. If they belong to the soul, then they not be given up. Just as it is difficult for fire to give up its body of heat. So he's saying because the desires belong to the mind, it is possible to give them up, even though it is difficult. If the desires belong to the soul, it would be much, much harder. It's like getting fire to give up quality of heat, or getting ice to give up the quality of coldness. It's much harder because they're so intrinsically linked with one another. Okay, let's see. Okay, I'll just mention one or two things. So it's saying that Krishna is saying here that one should be devoid of mental concoctions, right? He says this in the verse here, which basically means like daydreaming, like enjoying this world by spacing out and by living in the realm of hankering and lamenting, which is really what we do all the time. When we're living in the future, it's called hankering, right? You know, we're hankering, we're desiring something in the future, we're desiring something in the future, or we're anxious or fearful about the future. If it's aversion for the future, and if it's attachment for the past, then we're lamenting. And the nostalgia, right? Nostalgia is like a pleasurable thing sometimes. Oh, what I had, you know, and we're trying to enjoy, we're lamenting what we had. Or sad about the past. I can't change the past. So he's basically saying like we should not space out while we're living. We spend so much time with this consciousness of hankering for the future and lamenting about the past. So it's just like the example I gave of living vicariously through TV and movies and video games and all these things. We get completely absorbed, we forget ourselves, and we get to be absorbed in a false reality. And so anyways, the yogis knew that the soul is similarly living vicariously through the ahankar, through the false ego, the mind, the senses, the desires. And so one should not become so absorbed in that. You guys get what I'm saying? Just as we are sometimes absorbed in either living in the future or in the past or in Netflix or video games or Instagram or whatever it is, the yogi took it a step further and saw the soul is living vicariously through your false ego. I am this many years. It's another TV show. And so they became more situated in understanding the difference between the watcher of the show and the show itself. So we're like in a inception. We're like absorbed in even falser, we're absorbed in other people's realities and stories, not even our own. We allow other people to be the hero of our journey. Right? When you have your favorite actor, your favorite football star, they become the hero of your life. And that's why people like watching things, because finally someone can be a hero of their hero's journey. Then their losses become their pain and their wins become their joy. My team won. Did you see how she got the guy in season 4? You see how that, and it becomes like you become invested. And so just a healthy human will not be invested in that. But a yogi will not even be invested in one's own TV projection show of one's own ego, one's own mind and desire. Okay, we're over time. I could keep speaking forever, but to wrap this up, you guys have lives to live. Any question, any reflection, any point that you liked before we sign off here?
Say something.
Yeah, please.
Hi. it seems as if it's all about the choices we make in every situation. It's like we, you know how they say, well, you can control your actions, but you can control your consequences, the consequences. So it's all about choices. We choose to remember and cry, or we choose to plan and have all these expectations and then frustrated because it didn't happen the way you planned it. Or we choose to accept and believe and trust. So the way I see it is that we need to be more aware of our choices. The choices is really a daily practice. It's not easy. Nobody said it's easy. It's like the yoga practice. It's not easy there. It's a practice. That's it. It's a choice. It's always a choice. So many choices, so many things out there testing us or inviting us or teasing us, and then we make a choice.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah,
thank you
for that. I personally feel like whenever Martha speaks, it's like immediately captivating. And I'm like, man, she just like hits, like she says like one line, and I'm like, man, you use like the whole class in one line. That's all you had to say. Yeah, and really, that is the most powerful thing that we have, right? Is our ability to choose. And our ability to choose largely depends on the consciousness that we're in when we choose. Right? Which is why all these Vedic wisdom texts start from the realm of consciousness and the realm of thought and the realm of our conceptions. Because when you have right conceptions, you can have good ideas and good thoughts. And what follows good ideas and good thoughts is good action. You can't have good action without a mind and a heart full of goodness. And you can't have a heart full of goodness without good conceptions. Right? It won't be possible. And so that is why we focus so much on this stuff, because the conceptions have to be right. The conceptions are right, then everything flows and we have the right consciousness. And then that produces the right action. Yeah, beautiful. Anybody else? Last thoughts, reflections, question? We can just stare at each other blankly for a while too. It's also an option. Anybody, just one idea that stuck with you? Just share one idea that stuck with you today.
Yamuna, I was really struck by what you said earlier, where when don't act in a way that's harmonious with your nature, that dissonance itself causes like unease and illness over time. But I was also reflecting on how like the mind can convince you that like Arjuna in the first chapter, when he's like, oh, like fighting this battle is not in my nature, like I should be doing this, so it takes such a elevated level of consciousness to even know what is your nature and what is not. Because it's so, I guess what I'm saying is like I find myself staying in my comfort zone and being like, oh, like, no, that's not who I am. It's actually just like an excuse I have so that I don't have to do the hard thing,
Yeah, I feel you. It's why we need people more advanced than us, because they can see about ourselves that we can't see. And of course, there has to be trust and love and development, and they can be, evolved and actually be living in accordance with those principles and not just talking the talk. But when we have those people, it's really truly such a blessing, which is why the saints are the only friends, true friends of people, because then one cannot be swayed by attachment and aversion. They can see things as they are and also love you as you are. Because all other love is informed by attachment and aversion, which is really just a transformation of karma or lust. And so it's actually love, it's just attachment. And so when you find someone like that, it's very rare. It's very rare. But there are people that are available to us with varying degrees of that enlightenment who can see into us and bring the best out of us. And they see that little spark within us and they blow that spark. They blow that spark and they ignite the goodness within us. That is a friend. A friend sees the good and they see the bad, and they help you deal with the bad and they help you maximize the good. We consider a friend as, oh, you know, the one who like kind of sees the good, but also like validates my bad and also engages in the bad with me, and who just is attached and averse to the things I am. But we need someone outside of that playing field to give us shelter and to give us real guidance. Or else we're just in an echo chamber of what we already feel and believe, and we look for validation everywhere. So that is why a saint can be a true friend, and only then. And many times it can be confronting because it won't be in accordance with our attachments. Truth doesn't conform to your likes and dislikes. Reality doesn't conform to your likes and dislikes. So it's painful sometimes, the growth. Anybody else? One point, Marlene, I saw you had something.
I was just gonna say, I really like that verse 48. Perform your duty, and it's called yoga, and it's just, just do it. And so many of the foundational principles that we learn in yoga are so simple, in their ideals. They're really hard to execute, like Martha was saying. It's not easy. It's practice. It's every day. Constantly showing up. But I love that the principles themselves are just so direct and so simple. Like, just do the thing you're supposed to do. You'll be all right. it'll all be good. It'll all be easy. Just do your thing. And, that in itself is extremely hard, but, the principle itself is just so direct and so simple and so easy to understand.
Yeah, Srila Prabhupada said simple for the simple and difficult for the difficult. So a simple person, they can take one principle and go deeply. And one of my friends that I was with last week, he's a beautiful man. He said, I have a feeling that one truth lived deeply gives a rise to all other truths. At least I can speak for myself. Sometimes I'm like a collector of shallow truths, a collector of nice ideas and truth, but I don't apply them. Like, I don't mine them like a deep well. It's like, oh yes, there's a gold mine here, and there's a gold mine here, and there's a gold mine here, and there's a gold, but I don't actually be extracting anything from them. And so he said, I have this feeling that one truth lived deeply gives rise to all other truths in one's life. And so it just reminded me of that, Marlene. I'm like, yeah, it's simple. What Srila Prabhupada, what Krishna is saying is actually very simple. When one minds it deeply, it gives rise to all other truths and qualities within us. But we're difficult people, and we like variety, and we like all this other nonsense. And we need a trillion different rules and trillion different cute ideas just to keep us going at baseline. At least I'll just speak for myself, like collecting all these cute ideas and wisdom articles just to keep me going, at whatever level I'm at. And how much am I really mining? How much am I mining the gems? Really good, great for me. I got the deepest thing ever, but I'm like the water bug who's just on the surface of that water, just scurrying here and there. Like, what use is that deep ocean? So anyways, I think we should stop there. If anyone has anything, they can put in the WhatsApp group, but I really appreciate you guys. And thank you for giving me the opportunity. This was wonderful as always. And I hope to see you next week.
Thank you. Thank you.
15, 20 verses left max. Maybe we'll finish in the next week or two with this chapter and move to Karma Yoga. So Hari Om Tat Sat. Thank you all. Have a beautiful evening. See you guys.